Alright, I said I was going to do it today, and I'm going to do it. This is the story of Bartholomew Kuma. It all started a long time ago in the One Piece world. So, Bartholomew Kuma was born into a family. His race was special, called Buccaneer. He was a Buccaneer race type of human, or type of being, my bad. These people were kind of like giants, but like more like human. Known for their insane strength and durability. However, his people were taken into slavery. And then from a young age, he was a slave for the celestial dragons. Bartholomew Kuma was a slave. And he was a slave. They were talking about a warrior who wore, donned white and had a smile on his face. That would be Sun God Nika. And those legends were told by the slaves. And, one day he would come free them. And that's what they clung on to as they were, enslaved by these celestial dragons. They clung on to that, legend or myth or, what would soon be, other things. But not soon enough, because he lost his family during slavery. The celestial dragons killed his father right in front of him, and then his mother had died too. But then he was 8 years old, when God Valley incident happened. He was a slave still. And during God Valley, the slaves were set to, run around and, then these people would hunt them down. These people being, holy knights. And these, celestial dragons did it every year. They would hunt these slaves down and kill them for sport. Kuma wanted to, be free. He ran away. He got beat to death, and then, they caught him, and then, he still, ran away again because he, needed to get the fuck away. But during this time, a lot of shit was going on. It wasn't just that, the Roger pirates and the Rocks pirates were on the island. And that's what, eventually made God Valley disappear from history. Because they didn't want the world to know about Rocks D. Zebek, and that all these pirates, Big Mom, Kaido, and Whitebeard, and some other, well-known pirates were on a crew together. And this guy named Rocks D. Zebek was really, having the world oh shit, this guy's, making moves. Now, there were devil fruits on this island too. Inside of one of the chests was the pawpaw fruit. And a little boy named Ivankov found the fruit and said, "Hey, you gotta eat this and be cool. We can get the fuck out of here and other stuff." There was a girl. Her name was Jenny. This girl, was playing games with, Marines and pirates alike, on some, communications. Telling them different information and other stuff of what was going on the island. But then, they ended up getting the fuck out of there. Her, Kuma, and Ivankov. Ivankov tried to steal a devil fruit for himself, but then Big Mom took that devil fruit and gave it to Kaido. But anyways, they got out of that island, right? And Kuma started living a life on an island, Sorbet Kingdom area. And he was a healer for a while. And a couple years passed, and he became a doctor. See, he was recouping people. He was giving them health bars back. He would take the pain out of other people and then put it all inside of himself. So he would have people come up to him. He would hit them with the pawpaw fruit, remove the negative energy from him, the pain and all the shit that they were feeling. And after he collected everybody's pain, he would put it inside of himself. And like he would feel all that. And Jenny, that girl with the pink hair, was like, "Damn, Kuma, why the fuck do you do that to yourself?" And he's like, "Well, somebody has to, take on all their pain and understand it for them, And he was just like, I might as well do it, remove that pain, but it has to go somewhere. And then she was like, "Oh, you don't have to do all that. You're already a good guy. People like you and other things." But he eventually had to, fight against people who were fucking with these people. Tyrant Kuma, that's where that came to be. That name came to be. The people who were, he was helping, they were getting attacked by, the kingdom. The kingdom was playing games with them. And Kuma had enough of it, and he tried to go there and stop people. And then also, the Revolutionary Army, Dragon, came there, and Ivankov was there too. He came back. He's like, "We're starting the Revolutionary Army. You want to join up?" Jenny and Bartholomew Kuma did join up. They joined into the Revolutionary Army. And they were like the founders of the revolution. Then, eventually, Kuma had lost Jenny. See, Jenny was this girl. They were like really close, they were like girlfriend, boyfriend, really close relationship, right? Something like that. And they like to, play games with each other too. But, it was a real, cool relationship they had together. And so so that happened, right? And, they were, doing their thing with the Revolutionary Army, but she got caught by the Celestial Dragons. And then, Kuma was like, maybe we should do something about that to Dragon. And he was like, "No, we can't waste our manpower on one girl. Unfortunately, if you want to do that, you can, but I can't sign off on us going after Jenny like that. We have the world. We're going against the world right now. I'm trying to wake them up. And Kuma was like, "Damn, well then I'll take it on myself," because she's really close to him. And then he went there to Marijua. He knew about that place because he was a slave there a long time ago. She had been fucked around with, essentially. She got, fucked around with by the Celestial Dragons. I could say this. I'll drop this name in this video. I don't know, people fucking he calls to it. But the son of Saint Figurlin Garling, Shamrock, knocked her up. However, she had a disease and they threw her away. She got the Sapphire Skill disease, I think is what it's called. She was dying when Kuma found her. She's like, "Kuma, she's been, she's been raped, she's been, whatever, She was a slave to the Celestial Dragons. They threw her aside after she got sick." And he was like, "No, I'll save you and shit." But unfortunately, the disease was too much, and she ended up dying. And Kuma was heartbroken. But there was a little girl. This little girl's name was Jory Bonnie. And he kept her, and he, raised her as if she was his own daughter. He heard of Vegapunk from Dragon and other things. Vegapunk was working for the government at that point. Because this was years after, O'Hara and shit, which was another incident that the world knew about. And the Revolutionary Army had been around for a while, but then, Kuma had to leave because he had Jenny's daughter, which was Juri Bani. Juri Bani was there, and she had the sapphire scale disease too. But Vegapunk was like, okay, well, I can help your daughter out. But, for the help, saving your daughter and everything else, I need to, he calls to making you into a cyborg for the world government. You'll lose memory of everything. All the fun times you had with your daughter and everything you went through growing up. You won't be the person you were before. Revolutionary, king of Sorbet Kingdom, or, Tyrant Kuma. The one who, helped people out, all that shit. You'll lose your memory and you won't, be that anymore. You'll just be a slave to the world government like you were before. And he was like, you know what? I love her more. I want her to live. And he, he was like, yeah, well, I love my daughter, so I'm gonna make sure I take care of her and shit. That girl matters and stuff. And he was like, all right, well, I'll also do this for you. There's a little trick I put in there because I'm Vegapunk. The order is to also protect your daughter. If anything goes wrong with her. But you still have to be a slave to the world government and everything else. And then also, not just that, I'm going to trick your body and trick it out, make sure you're a cyborg, right? But then I'm going to make clones of you for the world government. Everybody who knew about this was Vegapunk, Kizaru, Sentomaru also knew about it. And they all, knew about it, and it took some time. He had to go back to Vegapunk and get the upgrades, but during this time, Bonnie, she had ate an Adele fruit too. It's like the age fruit, I think, or like the time fruit. I don't remember what the Adele fruit was called, but she was able to basically change things into like old and young. But not just that, she was able to do other things with it too, later on. But it ain't about that in this video. This is about Kuma's backstory. So she was able to, do that with her Devil Fruit. Look old and look young. Kuma became one of the 7 warlords, right? And that was the real reason why he, became a cyborg. I kind of got that out of the way. I got that, I missed that in the explanation. But he had to do that because he needed to be a 7 warlord to protect that kingdom and other things. And also, Vegapunk was like, I can help your daughter out too. And since you are working with us as one of the 7 warlords of the sea now. And then he was, he still had his memory for a little bit. He still was Kuma for a while. And during this time, he went places, and he met people and other things, right? Different islands that were later, come into play. So Kuma went to, Kamabaka Kingdom and some other islands, around the New World in the Grand Line. And, he was one of the 7 warlords who knew about Mihawk's place, he knew about all kinds of places. And he could always go there and, be there because he had the pop-off fruit. Boom, boom, boom. He could go around places. And eventually he, was called to, be seen and shit because, a pirate was running around by the name of Straw Hat Luffy. His daughter was also running around. She became a pirate too. She started her own crew. But even though Luffy was a young, pirate and shit, he took note. He did take note of it. He took note of Luffy because he knew his dad. He knew Dragon from, back in the day when he was part of the Revolutionary Army. But then he was like, damn, my daughter's also a part of the worst generation with this guy, Dragon Son. And he's like, damn, I have to, protect Luffy a little bit. Because I know Dragon and, he could end up helping out the world, I don't know how. But he's special because he did defeat Crocodile. And defeating Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords, is, notable. That turns people's fucking head in the One Piece world. When a rookie does shit like that. So then they were like, okay, we'll, note that. And then Kuma did too. Kuma was like, all right, I'll watch out for this guy. And then eventually he defeated Rob Lucci at Enies Lobby, and then his bounty went up to 300 million. It was over his bounty. See, he had a frozen bounty of 296 million. I think is what Kuma's bounty was. And his bounty was higher than, and Luffy's bounty was higher than his. So he was like, okay, well, I have to let Gecko Moria know he shouldn't fucking play games with this guy. This guy is going to, fuck you up if you play games too much. Let me help you out. See, Kuma was actually, doing things for other reasons, not just for the government, but he had to keep up an act. He actually wanted to help the Straw Hats out. It didn't seem that way, though. It didn't play out that way, kind of. See, he, got to the island. He was there. He sent Perona somewhere. And then he also, shot the Straw Hats, with Ursa shot. Now, that was a test to see, if they were a strong crew or not. Or if the rumors were true, And then he was going to take Luffy in. But then, Zoro attacked. Boom. Zoro was there for his captain. And he was like, hey, you take me in instead. I'm trying to be the world's most powerful swordsman. That has to count for something. That's a threat to the world government, just like somebody trying to be king of the pirates. He was like, all right, well then you'll take on Luffy's pain and, you'll probably die from it. But, we all know Zoro didn't die from that. And Kuma was like, left like, okay, they actually are a crew of people who care about each other and other things. So later on in Sabaody, when, Luffy hit the Celestial Dragon and then Kizaru was caught, he went there too. He appeared there as well. And this was right before his last surgery with Vegapunk. He was like, I don't have much time left, he told Rayleigh and shit. I have to, make sure that I help the Straw Hats out on their journey. So I'll make it look like I've disposed of them, but I'm just sending these people to different islands and other things. They're disposed of. They're not a crew that's doing anything right now. When the Celestial Dragons asked, Luffy was taken care of by Kuma, But really, Kuma sent him to Amazon Lily. He sent Zoro to, Mihawk's place. He sent, Nami to one of the Sky Islands. Chopper to an island that had, creatures on it. And then he sent, Brook to, I guess this cult that was, like, worshiping his ass. He sent Frankie to one of Vegapunk's, like, islands somewhere where he had been making shit. People knew about him. And then he sent Nico Robin to Tequila Wolf, where there were slaves and other things. He sent Sanji to Kamabaka Kingdom. He sent Usopp to another island that had, like, plants and bugs on it. And, like I said, Luffy went to Amazon Lily. But with all of them scattered throughout the way, Kuma knew about those islands, and he just sent them flying. And they were, disbanded at that point. And the world knew it as, the Straw Hats were, whatever. But then later on, after that, and he told Rayleigh that, he would come back and other things to watch over, their ship or whatever, that the Straw Hats were not done for. They were just, I had to disperse them real quick. I don't have much time to be me anymore. I have to go to Vegapunk and get my mind right. And then I'll be a cyborg for the world government. And then the next time we were seen after that, he wasn't Kuma no more, basically. He was just PX0, the first pacifista. And he was at Marineford, and he fought against Emporio Ivankov and Luffy, for a little bit. Then, after the War of the Best, and he also took down Little Horse Jr. with the Ursa shot. But he went on to, become a slave for St. Charles. That was the next time he was seen, and Sabo was there, and he was like, God damn, this man, raised me in the Revolutionary Army, and I missed that point too. Before he left the Revolutionary Army, he taught Sabo about, hockey and other things. He was one of the trainers for Sabo, training him up to be the chief of staff of the Revolutionary Army. And then as the chief of staff of the Revolutionary Army later on, Sabo saw Kuma, and he was like, damn, I need to save him. That's not Kuma. That's not the man that, he wouldn't be doing that shit if he wasn't a cyborg. I don't sign off on that shit. We'll save him and we'll make him all right. And that's what they tried to do, to get Kuma out of there and then free some other slaves too. And then they got information about, Emu and, who was on the, throne of the world government. The Elder Stars had their, demonic forms, and they attacked Sabo and everything else. Now they took Kuma back to the Revolutionary Army, and they were camped out on Kamabaka Kingdom, on Ivankov's Island and shit, right? But then after, a little bit, he decided to, get the fuck out of there and stuff, right? He was looking for his daughter and shit, basically. But he was like kind of stupid because he was all fucked up. He ran into the red line, and then he went up to Mariswa, and he was like, doing some things, looking for people. And then Akahinu saw him and was like, what the fuck are you doing out here? You can't be, running around like this. You're a slave. You have to just do that now. He got hit by Akahinu. And then he, came back to Egghead Island, and he smashed Saturn in the face. Before, a while, and he was there for a little bit. Kuma was there for his daughter to save her, but then he did die. And he did die because he wasn't, himself anymore, but he came back to save his daughter. And that's, not Vegapunk, but that's Bartholomew Kuma for you. All those, pacifistas, were made by him. Well, not by him, but, of him. And Bonnie, loved her father, and, she got to see him. But he was, not the same anymore. She, was happy to see him, but also not, because he was, not the same. But kind of it was, because he protected her from that bitch called Saturn. But he was still doing shit, and I don't talk about the manga, but I did talk about the manga. I actually did talk about it a little bit, but not too much. I left a little bit of sprinkles in there. But that's the story of Bartholomew Kuma, and basically its entirety. He's gone, basically. But that was his story. He was a great guy who, he did a lot of shit. He was a slave. He, had to, work through that, and he, started saving people at a church, kind of, as a good person, taking out, pain from people, and then putting it inside of himself so they wouldn't have to endure it. And then he protected that kingdom from, real tyrants, but then he became the tyrant because the world liked to spin shit other ways. They were always attacking his dick like that because he was a buccaneer, a person who, there was rumors that the real Joy Boy was of this, type of race too. Like the sun god Nika, the one from Legend and shit, was like that. And he, did that, and then he became a revolutionary. Dragon needed him, and he was there for him for a while. He trained Sabo up, and he also, had Ginny by his side for a while. Then she got kidnapped, fucked around with by some fucking weak-ass animals. Then, he had a daughter that wasn't his, but he raised her like he was, or she was, my bad. And then, he became a cyborg. And even then when he became a cyborg, he was starting to help the world out the best he could, even though he was a warlord in the shadows. Nobody knew about him. Even later, Frankie was like, this guy was watching our ship the whole time, making sure nobody came to fuck with it. And that was under, the programs that Vegapunk put in, because at that point he was a cyborg and then a slave to the Celestial Dragons. But Kuma had a very tragic backstory. Like I said, a slave, but then he was free. At the end of it, he was free. He had to die, basically, but that's how he had to live his life. It is worse than Nico Robbins. He lost a lot of shit. He had time with people for brief moments in his life, and then he had to do a lot for others. He gave himself for other people. Sacrificed a lot. And he did get to see Sun God Nika, that would be Luffy, And that was one of his dreams too as a child, to see the Warrior of Liberation, and he got to see him. But yeah, stay cool on the corner and watch the anime still. If you like Stub, watch it. If you like Dub, watch it. You gotta watch it both ways, or one way. But yeah, that's the story of Bartholomew Kuma as told by Darius the Green Angel. Stay cool on the corner. And don't become a slave to Emu. Be free and follow Straw Hats. And people like the Straw Hats.